The sun in Redemption Creek, Colorado, wasn't forgiving. It beat down on Zara Miller's shoulders like a hammer on an anvil, hot and merciless. The year was 1875, and this dusty frontier town felt like the edge of the world. Her wrists were raw, bound tight with a rope that felt like it was woven from thorns. Before her, a sea of faces. Leering men, tired ranchers, saloon owners with dark intentions in their eyes. She stood on a wooden block, a piece of property about to be sold. Her two children, little Emma and even littler Thomas, clung to her skirt. Their eyes were wide, taking in a horror they were too young to understand. 3 months. That's how long it had been since her husband Richard had died from a fever. 3 months since her world had collapsed. He'd left behind a mountain of secrets, the largest of which was a gambling debt that the bank now wanted paid. They took everything: the house, the furniture, the memories, and then they took her. Next up, a widow and her 2 young ones, the auctioneer's voice boomed across the square. Good for housekeeping, cooking, child-rearing. The whole lot starts at $20. Zara pulled her children closer. She had made them a silent promise. They would not be separated. She would die before she let that happen. The crowd murmured. A man with yellow teeth and a stained vest shouted, 25! Another voice countered, 30! The bidding crawled upward, each new offer a fresh stab of humiliation. Then a voice cut through the noise, deep and commanding. $50! The crowd went quiet. They parted like a river around a stone, revealing a tall man walking toward the block. He wore worn leather boots and a Stetson hat that shaded a pair of piercing blue eyes. He moved with a quiet confidence, a man who didn't need to shout to be heard. $50 from Samuel Hayes, the auctioneer announced, a note of surprise in his voice. A whisper went through the crowd. Samuel Hayes, owner of the Silver Creek Ranch, a man known for his wealth, his privacy, and his fairness. He rarely came to town, and when he did, he didn't linger. What could a man like him possibly want with a widow and her children? The man with the yellow teeth, Frank Dawson, shot Hayes a dirty look. 60! He yelled, his eyes fixed on Zara. 100! Samuel Hayes said immediately, his voice flat, his gaze never leaving Zara's. A gasp rippled through the square. $100 was a fortune, more than a housekeeper was worth, more than cheap labor was worth. It was a statement. Frank Dawson stared, his face turning a blotchy red, but he stayed silent. The auctioneer, his eyes wide, cleared his throat. $100 for Mr. Hayes. Going once. Going twice. Sold! As a deputy led Zara and her children from the block, Samuel Hayes approached. Up close, she could see the lines etched around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. His gaze was steady, but not unkind. Madam, he said, tipping his hat, my wagon is waiting. The ranch is a half-day's ride. Zara lifted her chin, her voice trembling only slightly. What? What will be expected of us, Mr. Hayes? A strange look flickered in his eyes. We'll discuss that when we're away from this place. The auctioneer scurried over with a contract and a pen. As Samuel signed his name with a steady hand, Zara saw Frank Dawson watching them, his eyes narrowed with a look of pure venom. Dawson ain't happy you outbid him, the auctioneer muttered to Samuel. Samuel's jaw tightened. Dawson should stick to his saloon and leave decent folks alone. He didn't just sound dismissive. He sounded angry, like there was a history there she couldn't possibly understand. Samuel led them to a sturdy wagon at the edge of town. He untied Zara's wrists himself, his fingers surprisingly gentle against her chafed skin. He helped the children climb aboard, then took the reins. With a soft click of his tongue, the horses pulled them away from Redemption Creek, away from the worst day of Zara Miller's life. But she had a terrible feeling that the danger wasn't over. It was just changing its shape. The wheels of the wagon turned, kicking up dust that swirled behind them like a ghost. For nearly an hour, no one spoke. The rhythmic creak of the wood and the steady plod of the horses were the only sounds. Exhausted by fear, Emma and Thomas soon fell asleep, their small heads resting against Zara's sides. The dusty plains slowly gave way to rolling hills, dotted with the dark green of pine trees. The air grew cooler, cleaner. "Mr. Hayes," Zara finally said, her voice quiet but firm. "I must know. What do you expect?" He glanced at her, his expression unreadable, before turning his eyes back to the road. "First off, Mrs. Miller, I don't hold with indentured servitude. What happened to you today? It was a crime." Zara was stunned into silence. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of it. "Then why did you buy us?" she whispered. His voice turned grim, the kindness replaced by something hard as iron. "Because I know Frank Dawson. I know what he does to the women he purchases for his saloon." He paused, his hands tightening on the reins. "And no child should ever be separated from their mother. Not ever." It was a good answer, the right answer. But something about the way he said it felt rehearsed, like a line he'd been waiting to deliver. "So, what happens now?" she asked, her heart pounding with a fragile, dangerous hope. "You'll have a place to stay, a roof over your heads, food in your bellies, safety." He looked over at the sleeping children. "In return, if you're willing, I need help in the ranch house. My last housekeeper left to get married." "And my children?" A small, sad smile touched his lips. "Children belong on a ranch. Fresh air, room to run. They'll be free to just be children." Zara watched him, searching his face for a lie, for the hidden angle. Men didn't do things like this out of the goodness of their hearts, not in her experience. "Why would you do this for strangers, Mr. Hayes?" He was quiet for a long time. The sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the clouds in shades of orange and red. "Because someone once did something similar for me," he said, his voice low and distant. It felt like another line, another piece of a story he wasn't telling. Then, more firmly, he added, "When I arrived, I heard them talking about splitting you up. I couldn't let it happen. But $100... It's just money, Mrs. Miller. Some things are worth more." He seemed to sense her lingering doubt. "Let me be clear. You are not my property. Those papers I signed are kindling as far as I'm concerned. I signed them only to give me a legal claim, to keep men like Dawson from trying to take you. You're a free woman. I'll pay you a fair wage, and you can leave whenever you wish." Tears filled Zara's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. It was too much, too fast. A rescue so complete it felt like a dream she was bound to wake up from. "There it is," Samuel said, nodding toward a valley ahead. Silver Creek Ranch. The main house was built of sturdy logs, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. It looked strong, safe, a fortress. As they drew closer, he helped her down, then gently lifted the sleeping children, carrying Thomas himself. "He's a sound sleeper," Samuel noted. "Only when he feels safe," Zara replied, the truth of her own words surprising her. Deep down, her son had sensed a change. But was it a change for the better or just a different kind of trap? The inside of the house was clean and spacious, dominated by a large stone fireplace. It felt like a home, but it was a lonely one. He showed her to a room with a large bed and a small trundle bed beside it. "I thought they might want to stay close," he said. After they laid the children down, he led her to the kitchen and put on a pot of coffee. He moved with an easy competence, but there was a stiffness to him, a practiced solitude. "I have 3 ranch hands," he explained. "Drew, Miguel, and Joe. They're good men. They have their own quarters in the bunkhouse. They won't bother you." And my duties? Cooking, cleaning, the usual housekeeper's work. I'll pay you $15 a month plus room and board for all of you. Zara almost dropped her cup. $15 a month was more than generous. It was a lifeline. It was enough to save, to dream of starting over again. That's too much, she stammered. It's what the job is worth, he said simply. But as he looked at her, his piercing blue eyes seemed to be measuring her, weighing her, not like property, but like a piece of a puzzle he was trying to solve. He had rescued her, yes, but Zara couldn't shake the feeling that Samuel Hayes hadn't just bought a housekeeper. He had bought a secret, and she was beginning to think it was a secret that had belonged to her dead husband. The next few weeks passed in a strange state of peaceful uncertainty. Samuel Hayes was true to his word. He treated Zara with a formal respect and her children with a surprising gentleness. Emma and Thomas, freed from the terror of Redemption Creek, blossomed under the wide-open sky. They followed the ranch hands. Drew, a quiet man with kind eyes, Miguel, who always had a story, and gruff old Joe, asking endless questions, their laughter echoing across the valley. One morning, Zara watched from the kitchen window as Samuel lifted Thomas onto the back of an old, patient mare. He held the boy securely, walking the horse in slow circles, his face calm and focused. The sight was so normal, so paternal, that it made Zara's heart ache. She saw the man he could be, the father he might have been. He'd told her he'd lost his own wife and daughter, Hannah, to influenza 5 years ago. He spoke of it with a profound, impenetrable sadness that kept her from asking more. It was a perfect story. A widower, haunted by his past, saving a widow and her children in an act of redemptive kindness. It was a story fit for a Sunday sermon, and Zara didn't believe a word of it. It wasn't that he was unkind. He was the opposite. He was thoughtful. He noticed Emma was bright and arranged to get books from the school teacher in town. He saw that Thomas was fearless and taught him how to be safe around the livestock. He talked to Zara each evening on the porch, sharing comfortable silences she'd never known with her restless, fast-talking husband, Richard. But it was all too perfect. His answers were always ready, his motives always pure. He was a ghost, living in a house full of memories he never spoke of, and he watched her with an intensity that had nothing to do with housekeeping. One afternoon, a rider approached. Samuel tensed instantly. "That's Sheriff Walton," he said, his voice tight. The sheriff was a weathered man with tired eyes. "Hayes," he greeted, then tipped his hat to Zara. "Ma'am." "What brings you out this way, Sheriff?" Samuel asked, his stance casual but his eyes sharp. "Couple of things," Walton said, dismounting. "First, thought you should know Frank Dawson's been flapping his gums in town, asking questions about Mrs. Miller here, wondering if you'd be willing to sell her contract." A cold knot formed in Zara's stomach. Samuel's jaw hardened. "Her contract isn't for sale." "Figured as much," the sheriff nodded. "But that ain't all. Got word of a Comanche raiding party spotted about 40 miles south. Probably nothing, but best be alert." After the sheriff left, Samuel reassured her. "Dawson is a coward, and the Comanche rarely come this far north." He said the words, but his actions told a different story. Zara saw him speaking privately with his men. The watches were doubled. The rifles were cleaned and kept close at hand. The piece of Silver Creek Ranch had been revealed for what it was, a fragile illusion. That night she couldn't sleep. The wind whistling around the house sounded like whispers. She thought about her husband, Richard. He'd been a traveling salesman, always chasing the next big deal, always coming home with a little less money than he left with. The gambling debts had been a shock, but were they the whole story? He'd traveled through this part of the country. He knew Redemption Creek. Could he have known Samuel Hayes? Could he have known Frank Dawson? The next day, while cleaning Samuel's office, a room he always kept locked but had left open by mistake, She noticed a small, leather-bound book on his desk. It wasn't a ledger. It looked like a journal. Her hands trembled, but she couldn't stop herself. She opened it. The handwriting was neat, precise. The entries were short, dated. Most were about the ranch, the cattle, the weather. But one entry from 5 years ago made her blood run cold. They're gone. Dawson said it was influenza. The doctor confirmed it. But the doctor is in Dawson's pocket. It wasn't sickness. It was murder. And he took my land. He will pay. I will get it all back. It wasn't influenza. It was murder. His wife and daughter hadn't just died. They had been killed. And Samuel hadn't just lost his family. He'd lost his land. This ranch, Silver Creek Ranch, hadn't been his to begin with. He had bought it back. The story he told everyone was a lie. He wasn't a kind widower. He was a man hunting for revenge. And for some reason, he believed Zara and her 2 small children were the key. Zara closed the journal, her heart hammering against her ribs. She put it back exactly where she found it, her mind reeling. The entire foundation of her new life was a lie. Samuel wasn't a savior. He was a hunter. He was using her children, as part of a 5-year-old quest for vengeance against Frank Dawson. But why? What was the connection? What did any of this have to do with her dead husband, Richard? She backed out of the office, pulling the door quietly shut, just as Samuel came down the hall. He stopped, his eyes narrowing slightly as he saw her. "Is everything all right, Zara?" he asked, his voice even. "Yes," she lied, her own voice sounding foreign and thin. Just dusting." He nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on her face, then on the office door. He knew. He knew she'd been inside. But he said nothing, just walked past her and went into the kitchen. The quiet tension in the house was now a suffocating blanket. Every meal, every polite conversation was a performance. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage, a pawn in a game she didn't understand. Days turned into a week. The threat of the Comanche faded, but the vigilance at the ranch did not. Samuel was gone more often, riding the property lines with his men, his face a grim mask. Zara watched, waited, and pieced together the fragments of truth. She remembered Richard mentioning Frank Dawson once, a long time ago. He'd called him a business partner, then quickly changed the subject when she'd asked for details. One evening, as she was mending one of Thomas's shirts on the porch, Samuel sat down in the chair beside her. For a long time, they didn't speak, just watched the sun set. "I've been meaning to ask," he said, his voice startling her. "Does the name Richard Miller mean anything to you beyond being your husband's name?" The question was a bucket of ice water. She looked up from her sewing, her hands frozen. "I don't understand." "Your husband," Samuel said, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "He wasn't just a gambler, was he, Zara? He was a thief and a coward." Bitterness and confusion warred inside her. "He was my husband, the father of my children." "He was Frank Dawson's partner," Samuel continued, his voice dangerously low. "They came to this valley together 6 years ago. Richard was a surveyor. He found something here, something valuable." He finally turned to look at her, his blue eyes burning with a cold fire. "There's a silver vein running under this land. The richest strike in this territory. Richard found it. He and Dawson conspired to steal the land from my wife's family." Zara felt the air leave her lungs. It was all clicking into place, a horrifying mosaic of greed and death. "My wife, Sarah, and my daughter, Hannah, were here," Samuel said, his voice breaking for the first time. "I was away, buying cattle. When I came back, they were dead. Dawson paid off the doctor to say it was influenza. He forged a deed and took the ranch. Richard Miller was his witness on that forged deed." "No," Zara whispered. It couldn't be true. Richard had been weak, a failure, but a killer. "He got scared," Samuel went on, his voice relentless. "He took his share of the money and ran. He met you, started a new life, and left Dawson here to run the mine. But Dawson got greedy, and Richard gambled away his share. When he died, Dawson saw his chance. He called in the debt through the bank, knowing it would put you and your children on that auction block. He wanted Richard's family under his thumb. Maybe he thought Richard told you something, left you a map, a key, some proof of their crime. He stood up, pacing the porch like a caged wolf. I've spent 5 years working, saving, buying back this land piece by piece. I came back to Redemption Creek under a new name, Samuel Hayes, waiting for my chance. When I saw you on that block, I knew the time had come. Dawson wanted you. That meant you were important. The world tilted under Zara's feet. She wasn't a charity case. She was bait. So you bought me, she said, her voice hollow. To get to Dawson. I bought you to protect you, he countered, his voice raw. And yes, to finish this. Dawson has to pay for what he did to my family. Before she could process the full, terrifying truth of her situation, the sound of galloping hooves shattered the evening quiet. One of the ranch hands, Drew, rode into the yard at a full sprint, his horse lathered in sweat. Comanche! He yelled, his voice ragged with panic. South pasture! They've stampeded the herd and set fire to the line shack. Samuel didn't hesitate. The grieving husband was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating commander. He was already moving, strapping on his gun belt. How many? 6, maybe more. They're riding hard. Samuel turned to Zara, his eyes urgent. Get inside. Lock the doors. There's a shotgun in my room. You know how to use it? Zara nodded, her body moving on instinct, her mind numb with shock. Murder. Silver mines. A husband she never knew. And now, an attack. Don't open the door for anyone but me, Samuel ordered. He grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly gentle. Zara, whatever you think of me, keep the children safe. Then he was gone, mounting his horse and riding with Drew toward the orange glow that was beginning to stain the southern sky. Zara ran inside, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She locked the door, her hands shaking. She checked on the sleeping children, their innocent faces a stark contrast to the ugly world that had just been revealed. She found the shotgun, its cold weight a terrifying comfort. As she stood by the window, watching the distant fire, a new thought, colder and sharper than any before, cut through her fear. Samuel had said the Comanche rarely came this far north. The sheriff had said it. What if the attack wasn't a coincidence? What if the raiders weren't Comanche at all? What if Dawson had finally made his move, using the rumor of a raiding party as a cover to wipe out Samuel Hayes and his entire ranch for good, and she and her children were trapped right in the middle of it? For hours, Zara waited. The distant glow of the fire eventually died down, leaving the night darker than before. Every gust of wind, every creak of the old ranch house sent a jolt of fear through her. She clutched the shotgun, her knuckles white, her eyes straining to see through the darkness. The children slept on, oblivious. They were the only pure things left in a world built on lies. It was long past midnight when she heard the sound of horses. Not the frantic gallop of an attack, but the slow, tired tread of weary riders. Peering through the curtain, she saw Samuel's tall frame dismount. Relief, sharp and painful, washed over her. She unlocked the door just as he reached the porch. He was covered in soot, his face grim. "The fire's out," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion and smoke. "We lost the line shack, lost some cattle. Miguel took an arrow to the arm, but he'll live." He sank into a chair in the kitchen, the fight draining out of him. "The Comanche?" Zara asked, her voice barely a whisper. He shook his head. "They were gone by the time we got there. It was a quick raid. Hit hard, cause confusion, and vanish." He looked up at her, his blue eyes clouded with a frustration that went beyond lost cattle. "It doesn't feel right." Zara brought him a basin of water and a cloth. As she gently wiped the grime from his face, Her fingers trembled. "Samuel," she began, her voice low, "when the sheriff warned you about the Comanche, what if Dawson heard those same rumors?" He froze, the cloth halfway to his cheek. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time she saw the man behind the mission. She saw the grief, the rage, and the bone-deep weariness. "You think he staged it," he said. It wasn't a question. "They strike right after you reveal everything to me," she reasoned, thinking aloud. "They create a fire, a diversion, to draw you and your men away from the house, away from me and the children." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by a wave of cold fury. "He wasn't trying to destroy the ranch. He was trying to get to you." He stood up so fast the chair scraped loudly against the floor. He went to the window, staring out into the blackness. "He thinks Richard left you something. A map. A deed. The original untampered deed." He turned back to her, his face a mask of self-loathing. "I brought you into this. I put you in his crosshairs. I was so focused on my own revenge, I didn't see the danger I was putting you in." "What did my husband have that Dawson would kill for?" Zara asked, needing to know the final, ugly piece of the puzzle. "Proof," Samuel said grimly. "Richard was meticulous. He kept ledgers for everything. Dawson is a brute, but Richard was clever. He would have kept a record of their crime, a piece of insurance to hold over Dawson's head. Dawson has likely been searching for that ledger since the day Richard died." A memory surfaced, sharp and clear. A small, locked box Richard always kept in his travel bag. He'd called it his accounts box. After he died, in her grief and confusion, she'd packed it away with his other meager belongings. It was in the bottom of her trunk, right in her bedroom. "I think I have it," she whispered. Samuel's eyes widened. "Where?" "In my room, a small metal box." They moved quickly, quietly, to her bedroom. The children were still asleep. Zara knelt by her trunk, her hands fumbling with the latch. She pulled out the small black box. It was locked, and she didn't have the key. Without a word, Samuel took a poker from the fireplace, and with a single, sharp twist, he broke the simple lock. Inside, nestled among some old receipts, was a thin, leather-bound book. A ledger. Zara opened it. The first few pages were legitimate business accounts, but then the handwriting changed. The entries became coded, lists of numbers and names. Her eyes scanned the page, and two names jumped out: Dawson and Hayes. Next to the name Hayes was a date. The date Samuel's wife and daughter had died, and next to that, a sum of money, a payment. It was the proof, the murder, the theft, all of it, recorded in her husband's neat, careful script. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Samuel was on his feet in an instant, shotgun raised. He motioned for Zara to stay silent, to get behind the bed. He moved to the doorway, pressing himself flat against the wall. The silence in the house was absolute, heavy, and terrifying. Another creak, closer this time. Someone was inside the house. The attack on the line shack wasn't the main event. It was the overture. The real assault was happening now. The sound came from the main room, a soft thud, like a window being gently raised. Then another. They hadn't come through the doors. They had been patient, waiting for the men to return, waiting for the guard to be lowered. Dawson hadn't just wanted the ledger. He wanted to eliminate everyone who knew it existed. Samuel's face was stone. He held up two fingers, pointing toward the window. Then he mouthed the word, "Go." He wanted her to escape with the ledger while he created a diversion. But her children were here. She shook her head, her eyes wide with terror. She wasn't leaving them. He understood. He gave a sharp, frustrated nod. He pointed at the ledger in her hands, then at the loose floorboard under the rug beside the bed. "Hide it." Zara quickly knelt, prying up the board and shoving the small book into the dark space below. She replaced the board just as a shadow fell across the bedroom doorway. A man stood there, a hulking silhouette against the dim light from the hall. He wasn't one of Samuel's hands. "Hayes," the man grunted. "Dawson wants to see you. And the woman." Samuel didn't move. "You're not welcome in this house," he said, his voice deadly calm. The man chuckled, a low, ugly sound. "We ain't asking." He took a step into the room, raising a pistol. Before he could aim, Samuel fired the shotgun. The roar was deafening in the confined space. The man was thrown backward into the hall. A cry of pain and surprise cut short. But it was too late. The shot was a signal. Shouts erupted from outside. Glass shattered in the main room. The siege had begun. "Stay here!" Samuel yelled, reloading with frantic speed. "Don't come out no matter what!" He disappeared into the hallway, and the house exploded into chaos. Gunshots, the splintering of wood, men shouting. Zara scrambled under the bed, pulling the covers down to hide herself, her heart feeling like it would beat its way out of her chest. She could hear Emma begin to cry in her sleep. A new sound cut through the noise, a high-pitched, terrified scream. It wasn't Emma. It came from outside. It was Thomas. Zara's blood ran cold. She crawled out from under the bed and risked a look out the window. In the faint moonlight, she could see them. 2 men on horseback, and one of them was holding her son. Thomas was struggling, kicking, his small face pale with terror. They had snatched him from his bed through the window. It was a trap. The entire assault on the house was a diversion. All they wanted was leverage. A voice bellowed from the darkness, Frank Dawson's voice. "Hayes! You hear me in there? I've got the boy. You want him back. You bring me the woman and whatever secrets she's holding. You've got 5 minutes before the boy takes a fall." The gunshots inside the house stopped. A terrible silence fell. Samuel knew. Zara knew. They had lost. Dawson had played his hand perfectly. He had her son. He had them all. Zara looked at the floorboard where the ledger was hidden, the proof of Dawson's crimes. But what good was proof if her son was dead? The choice was no choice at all. "Samuel!" Zara screamed, her voice raw with anguish as she ran into the hallway. He was there, leaning against the wall, a dark stain spreading across his shoulder. He'd been shot. Drew lay on the floor nearby, unmoving. "Don't," Samuel grunted, his face pale with pain. "It's what he wants." "He has my son," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "There is no other way." She looked at the man who had bought her, the man who had lied to her, the man who had just taken a bullet for her. His quest for revenge had led them all to this nightmare. But looking at his face, contorted in pain and fury, she saw something else. It wasn't just about vengeance anymore. He was terrified of losing them. All of them. "Give me the ledger," he rasped, trying to push himself off the wall. "I'll make the trade." "No," Zara said, her voice hardening with a resolve she didn't know she possessed. "He wants me. He thinks I'm the key. You're wounded. He'll kill you and take it anyway." She took a deep breath, the cold air burning her lungs. "I'll go." She knelt, pried up the floorboard, and took out the thin leather book. It felt heavy now, impossibly heavy. She looked at Samuel, her eyes pleading for him to understand. "Keep Emma safe," she whispered. Then, before he could argue, she turned and walked toward the shattered front door, out into the terrifying darkness, holding the proof of one man's evil as a shield against another's. The night air was cold. Frank Dawson sat on his horse like a king on a throne, a cruel smile on his face. One of his men held Thomas in front of him, the boy's small body trembling. Thomas saw her and let out a choked cry. "Mama!" "Let him go, Dawson," Zara said, her voice steady, betraying none of the terror that was screaming inside her. "I'm here. I have what you want." Dawson's eyes gleamed with greed as he looked at the ledger in her hand. "The book first. Richard was always a careful man, too careful for his own good." "Let my son go," Zara repeated. "He's no use to you. Dawson laughed. "He's of great use. He's what got you to come out of that house so cooperatively." He nodded to his man. "Give the boy to his mama." The rider urged his horse forward and roughly handed Thomas down to Zara. She hugged him tight, burying her face in his hair, checking him for injuries. He was terrified, but unharmed. She held him with one arm, the ledger still clutched in her other hand. "Now the book," Dawson demanded, holding out his hand. "Samuel is hurt," Zara said, stalling, her mind racing. "He needs a doctor." "Hayes will get what he deserves," Dawson sneered. "Just like his wife and brat did, just like your fool husband did. Now give it to me." He started to dismount, his patience gone. Zara knew this was her only chance. Samuel was wounded, his men were down. There was no rescue coming. It was up to her. "You want it?" she said, her voice rising. "Then come and get it." And with a strength born of pure desperation, she turned and ran. Not toward the house, but toward the dark, rocky hills that bordered the ranch. She ran, holding her son, the ledger clutched tight. It was a foolish, suicidal move. They were on horseback. She was on foot, carrying a child. She wouldn't get 100 yards. But she wasn't trying to escape. She was trying to change the battlefield. Shouts of anger rose behind her. "Get her!" Dawson roared. Hoofbeats thundered in the darkness. She scrambled up a steep, shale-covered slope, her lungs burning, Thomas sobbing in her arms. She could hear them closing in. A gunshot cracked and dirt exploded just to her left. She reached a small plateau, a dead end with a sheer drop on one side and a wall of rock on the other. It was a trap. She was cornered. Dawson and his men rode up, their horses circling her, their faces illuminated by the rising moon. They looked like devils. "Nowhere left to run, Mrs. Miller," Dawson said, his voice dripping with triumph. He dismounted and walked toward her. "Give me the book." Zara held Thomas behind her, shielding him with her body. She held the ledger out over the edge of the cliff. "Stay back," she warned, "or I'll drop it." Dawson stopped, his eyes wide with fury. "You wouldn't dare. That's your only bargaining chip." "It's not a bargaining chip anymore," Zara said, her voice shaking but clear. "It's justice. If I can't have it, neither can you." They were at a standoff. The wind whipped around them, cold and lonely. For a moment, nobody moved. The only sound was Thomas's quiet sobbing. Dawson's face was a mask of indecision. He needed that book. It was the only thing tying him to the murder of Samuel's family, the one piece of evidence that could hang him. Then, another sound drifted up from the valley below. A single, piercing whistle. Dawson's head snapped up. His men looked at each other, confused. The whistle came again, closer this time. It was a signal. A flicker of movement from the rocks above them caught Zara's eye. A man, silhouetted against the moon. It was Miguel, one of Samuel's hands. And he wasn't alone. Joe and 2 other men she didn't recognize were with them, rifles in their hands. Samuel hadn't been defeated. He'd been buying time. "It's an ambush!" one of Dawson's men yelled, raising his pistol. Before he could fire, a shot rang out from the rocks. The man cried out and tumbled from his horse. Chaos erupted. Dawson's men started firing wildly into the rocks. Zara dropped to the ground, pulling Thomas under her. Dawson stared, his face a picture of disbelief and rage. He had been outmaneuvered. He turned his fury on the only target he had left. He lunged for Zara, his hands reaching for the ledger. "It's mine!" he screamed. A shot echoed from the direction of the ranch house, louder than the others. It wasn't a rifle. It was a shotgun. Dawson stopped, a look of surprise on his face. He looked down. A dark red stain was spreading across the front of his shirt. He staggered, his eyes still fixed on the ledger, then he collapsed, tumbling off the edge of the plateau and into the darkness below. Silence. Zara looked up, her heart pounding. Standing at the base of the slope, leaning heavily on the porch railing for support, was Samuel. His shoulder was bandaged, but he was standing, and in his hands he still held the smoking shotgun. It was over. The aftermath was a blur. Sheriff Walton arrived with a posse, summoned by one of the new ranch hands Samuel had hired after the first Comanche scare. They weren't just ranch hands, they were guards, men Samuel had brought in, anticipating Dawson's move. Dawson's men surrendered. The body of Frank Dawson was recovered from the bottom of the ravine. Drew, the ranch hand from the house, would survive. As the sun came up, casting a clean new light over the valley, Zara sat on the porch steps, wrapped in a blanket, with Emma and Thomas huddled beside her. Samuel sat down next to her, his arm, the good one, settling around her shoulders. "You were very brave," he said softly. "I was terrified," she admitted. "I thought—" "I know," he said. "I'm sorry, Zara. I'm sorry for all of it. For the lies. For the danger." She looked at him, at the man who had lost everything, who had dedicated his life to a cold revenge, and who in the end had chosen to protect her and her children over that revenge. "Your wife's name was Sarah," she said quietly. "And your daughter was Hannah." He nodded, his eyes filled with a pain that would never fully heal. "Yes. Richard will answer for his part in what happened to them," she said. "In another life, if not this one. But you honored them tonight. You found justice, not just vengeance." He looked out at the ranch, his ranch, truly his now. He looked at the children, safe and sleepy beside him. He looked at Zara, her face bruised and tired, but her eyes clear and strong. "It wasn't just my land I was trying to get back," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "It was this, a home, a family. I just didn't know it until you arrived." A few weeks later, the legal mess was sorted out. The ledger proved everything. Samuel Hayes was declared the rightful owner of Silver Creek Ranch. The secret of the silver mine was his alone. He could have been one of the richest men in the territory. Instead, the first thing he did was sign a new deed. He gave Zara half ownership of the entire property. "This is your home," he said, handing her the papers. "Not as a housekeeper, not as a guest, as a partner." That spring, they were married, not in a church, but on the porch of the ranch house, with Sheriff Walton officiating and the ranch hands as their witnesses. Emma was the flower girl, and Thomas, very seriously, held the rings. Life at Silver Creek Ranch found a new rhythm. It wasn't built on secrets and lies anymore, but on shared loss and a hard-won trust. They expanded the house. The children grew, their laughter finally chasing away the last of the ghosts. A year later, another child was born, a daughter. They named her Sarah Hannah Hayes. Years passed. The silver mine made them prosperous, but they lived simply, their wealth measured not in dollars, but in the peace they had found. Sometimes when the sun was setting, Zara would stand on the porch and look out at the valley. She would remember the auction block, the fear, the desperation. It all felt like a story from another woman's life, a life that had ended the moment a tall stranger stepped out of the crowd and said, $100. He hadn't just bought a widow and her children. He had bought a second chance for all of them. And together, in the heart of that wild country, they had built a family, a legacy, and a home. They had found their redemption, not in a town, but in each other. It's a stark reminder that sometimes the deepest darkness comes right before the dawn, and the most dangerous secrets are the ones we keep from ourselves. If you enjoyed this story of survival and justice on the frontier, don't forget to like and subscribe for more strange, dark, and mysterious tales.